Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee. I am Senator Michael Jackson, standing in for Senator Corey McCray, who's in a bill hearing. Today, we're going to have before us the Maryland Tax Court Uninsured Employers Fund, the Department of Corrections, and Department of Environment. We will be starting with the Maryland Tax Court, and our budget analyst, Caleb Weiss, will give us the analysis.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead here, and on the screen, you can see the document. The fiscal 2023 allowance for the tax court increases by $61,000 or 7.6% to bring the total to $865,000 in fiscal 2023. Moving ahead to an overview of the agency's spending, as you can see here, 90.9% of the spending goes towards personnel. This is similar to past years. Contractual and state service charges comprise 5.4%, and supplies and other expenses at 3.8%. Moving ahead to the proposed budget changes, as you can see here, the vast majority of these are in personnel with accrued leave payout, health insurance, and retiree health insurance premiums as well. Here in Exhibit 3, we have the Maryland Tax Court clearance rate. As you can see in fiscal 2021, the percent of appeals cleared within 8 months has dipped significantly in fiscal 2021. However, the percent of appeals cleared within 12 months has remained relatively consistent. We are asking that the tax court should comment on ongoing efforts to get regulations changed to allow for virtual hearings in the future. The regulations were changed on an emergency basis during COVID-19, and this is just asking about a more permanent change that would allow for those virtual hearings in the future. Here in Exhibit 4, we have the tax assessment appeals rate. As you can see in fiscal 2021, the appeals rate dipped to 1.1% from 1.9% the prior year. And with that, we have the recommended actions. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. That's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Caleb. Any questions from the members? No question from the members. And I have a quick question, and I will certainly bring this up to Mr. Hearn. The virtual option that you presented, is there the downflux of cases? Do you think that was related to COVID, even though they were virtual?
That's my understanding, but I can certainly get more.
Okay, I'll address Mr. Hearn. All right, thank you, Caleb. Welcome, Mr. Hearn. Thank you for being here today, and thank you all for pushing through, as we all have had to do through the pandemic over the last year and a half, 2 years. So,
thank you, Senator, and members of the committee, for the opportunity to come before you, and thank Mr. Weiss for his analysis. I'm going to be brief, obviously. We certainly concur with their recommendation. As far as the comment on the virtual hearings, we had to approach our Attorney General, who reviewed our current regulations at the time, and they determined that we were not capable of holding remote hearings. So then they were able to compile and enact and promulgate emergency regulations allowing for virtual hearings. They expired in the 6-month period. However, upon their review of our regulations, again, the AG's office determined that a whole overall review of our regs had to be done. So that's where we're in the process now. We hope that we will be able to complete that certainly by the end of 2022. And that way the remote hearings will be an option for our constituents. Although, even though I must say, even in that 6-month period, there wasn't much request for it at the time, for whatever reason. The reduction in appeals filed is totally due to COVID. The lower level appeals stopped. Those agencies stopped issuing decisions. the next step is our level, so therefore our appeal number dropped. They've since picked up. We're probably back at regular pace right now, but we're still trying to catch up. Yeah, in addition, DoIT is, Department of Information Technology is also working with us to help us upgrade our technology for virtual hearing capability. There is a delay there because we're one of the agencies that will be moving down to the Central Business District. So we have to get that timeline finalized, and then we'll be able to work with them and hopefully get, capable for the virtual hearings.
All right, thank you very much. Could you speak to, so from a backlog standpoint, do you have confidence that you all will be able to catch up?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're pretty much caught up on the, most of our cases are the real property valuation appeals. So we are pretty much caught up as far as scheduling for those.
Okay.
And because by statute, we have to hear those within a certain timeline. So the other appeals, say, from the comptroller's office, we're getting through them, and luckily they're not issuing decisions right now, so we're able to catch up there. But yeah, we're probably 80% back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hearn. Any questions from members of the committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the work you all have done during this tough time, and look forward to getting a report or an update on your progress of the transition for the options of virtual hearings. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we finish, we're concluding the tax court. Thank you, Kayla White, for your analysis on this matter. Next, we're going to move to the uninsured employees fund and our budget analyst, Jason Kramer.
Bring the chairs.
Thank you. My name is Jason Kramer, and I'll be presenting the analysis for the Uninsured Employers Fund. The UEF pays workers' compensation claims to employees whose employer does not properly compensate them. The agency is funded by an assessment on workers' compensation awards in fiscal 2021. For fiscal 2021 only, that assessment was increased from 2 to 3% to assist with a low fund balance. I'll start here with the operating budget summary, which shows the spending from fiscal 21 to 23. The increase that you see here from between 21 and 22 is due to the agency not budgeting for a third-party administrator contract. Moving on to Exhibit 1. Exhibit 1 shows the overview of agency spending for fiscal 2023 in the governor's allowance. As you can see, nearly 2/3 of the fiscal 2023 allowance is for a contract with a third-party administrator, with most of the rest for agency personnel. Moving next to Exhibit 2, the proposed budget compared to the fiscal 2022 working appropriation. As you can see, very little change between fiscal 22 and 23. And so I'll move on to personnel data. Personnel for fiscal 2023, there are 13 authorized positions. 4 of those positions are vacant. 2 of those positions have been vacant for more than 6 years. I'll move on to key observation number 1, regards the agency's fund balance. As you can see in Exhibit 3 here, fiscal 2021 closed at $8.5 million, up from $6.3 the prior year. An actuarial study done by Pinnacle found liabilities of about $116 million at the close of fiscal 2020. While there has been some variance in the actual results compared to the Pinnacle actuarial study, the fund still appears to be on track for insolvency by the end of the decade. Due to the addition of the third-party administrator, UEF operating expenses are currently more than 3 times higher than they were just 5 years ago. The TPA has reduced benefits payments and found a larger share of non-UEF coverage for claims. However, on net, the savings are offset primarily by the cost of the contract. When asked for a plan to avoid insolvency, UEF only stated that an increased assessment rate is necessary. Another point to make about the TPA contract, reporting about TPA expenses continues to report the TPA expenses as benefit payments in certain reporting, like the MFR and statutorily required annual reports. DLS has raised this issue in every analysis since 2019. So DLS is recommending that UEF correctly report its TPA contract expenses as operating expenses. Moving on to Exhibit 4, a useful point of reference for UF is the Subsequent Injury Fund. The Subsequent Injury Fund is a similar agency that also handles workers' compensation benefits payments to certain populations. SIF makes about 10 times as many payments that are worth about twice as much as UEF's payments and resolves a similar number of cases. However, there are some significant differences. UEF must investigate liability, is involved in collections and criminal prosecutions and license suspensions. However, SIF does do many of the same functions in-house that UEF has contracted out, such as independent medical exam, need assessments, and bill reviews, and interpretation services. Last session, the Budget Committee has requested a thorough evaluation of UEF's personnel needs. The report that UEF submitted did provide a description of all of its personnel. However, it did not do a full evaluation or provide a summary of its needs or for personnel. UEF does state that its contract with the TPA is necessary, but without a personnel evaluation, it's hard to make that determination. One final point, the OLA submitted an audit report in September that had 3 findings, 2 of which were repeat. Corvall, the agency made overpayments to Corvall, which is the third-party administrator, and did not properly document hours worked by Corvall employees. UEF also made payments for services that were already included in the contract's monthly fee. The review also found that UEF did not review approximately $1.9 million in recurring payments, although no improper payments were found. And finally, the audit noted that one Corvall employee was the family member of a former UEF employee involved in the procurement, and UEF employee had their costs covered by Corvall for an out-of-state conference. That was referred to the Ethics Commission, which has not yet taken any action on the referral. DLS is recommending that UEF resolve its issues surrounding the TPA before pursuing an increase in the assessment, and recommends adding language restricting funds pending a report from OLA certifying corrective action has been taken. With that, I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. I think we're getting thinner and thinner in here. You know, we're in the heart of the legislative session. So, does my colleague have any questions for the analysts? Thank you. All right, we're going to welcome up thank you very much. We'll welcome up the director of UEF, Michael Burns, David Stesh, the principal counsel, and Michael Schaefer, if you're here. All right.
Thank you, Senator. Stallings, it's a pleasure to be here in person with you both. I would first really like to thank Mr. Kramer for his excellent production, and simply state that the agency is very appreciative to Mr. Kramer for his professionalism and his cooperation with us. It was a very pleasant experience and very fruitful, I think, for both parties. So I do want to note that for the record. And we agree, as our testimony indicates, with all aspects of the report, including the suggested budget language. I will note that in 2017, we had an audit. I'd started contemporaneously with that audit beginning, so that was before I arrived at the UEF. We had 8 findings in that audit, and in this most recent audit, 6 of those findings were successfully dealt with. 2 of them remain, which are issues that have continued to bedevil the UEF, and we continue to work on them. I will tell the committee that we have been working with staff and Corvall to resolve all three of the audit findings. We believe one of the audit findings, which has to deal with yearly indemnity payments, has already been resolved completely. And the other two I continue to work on, and I will simply tell you I have no problem at all doing a report to the OLA and to this body as to the status of that come next November. I'm happy to do so, and it is every intention of this agency to be able to report that we have complied with those audit findings should the OLA agree with us. So, and again, I thank Mr. Kramer for that suggestion. I think it's a very wise one, and it will encourage us to do what you expect us to do anyway. So I'm happy to do it. I would like to point out a few things to you about some of the things, just quickly, some of our successes. We've reestablished a business license suspension program, which is extremely effective in collecting money. That had been dormant before I got there. We've established a criminal enforcement program, which was authorized in the original statute in 1983, and yet nobody bothered to get it going until I got there in 2017. That is also very effective in collecting money. We have payment plans now. Every month they go up. We've gone from basically a few of those to approximately $500,000 a year now, and every month there are more of them. So as time goes by, the agency is getting a reliable and increasing amount of funding from that as well. I would point out some of the aspects of the benefits of the Corvall contract, one of which is Exhibit 2. That is a 27-page report I receive every month from Corvall. And it is very detailed as to all sorts of metrics, as to payments, as to what's going on. And it's got a history as well going back, I think, 13 months. So it is an example, I think, in great detail of why we have a TPA, why it is a professional TPA. And I would be more than happy at any point, should the committee wish to discuss this at length, I'd be happy to explain it to you. I have Mr. Schaefer here if you have any specific questions that I can't answer about it. But I can simply tell you, if you will look at our testimony at the first exhibit, the numbers speak for themselves. The first year Corvall was there, as they came in, we had $8.4 million in medical expenditures. And in the most recent fiscal year, that was $5.4 million. So that's $3 million savings. And those are real numbers that don't lie. In addition, as Mr. Kramer pointed out, we cover injured workers when there's no insurance. And often it's not clear if there's insurance or not. So we have to investigate that. Corvall has taken our numbers from before they got there, which was 9% of 9 out of 100 cases we would find coverage. Today we average, and we've averaged for the last 3 years, I believe, Mr. Schaefer, 55%. 55 cases out of 100. And the savings there, I can't quantify them to you because I don't know what the cost would be. But they could raise anywhere from $5,000 to $1 million. Additionally, the investigators in Corvall works very closely, and Mr. Stesch is here as principal counsel for the agency, just for information purposes, but they work very closely together on preparing cases for us. And I can tell you from my own experience working with them that in the last year, there are 2 cases, very tough cases, could have gone either way, and we won them both, and they were both $1 million cases against us if we'd lost. And those are the kind of things that, you know, it's easy to show how much something costs, but it's not as easy to show you all how much we save. I can simply tell you this from my experience. Nothing I have done in 5 years has made as big a difference to fix the UEF and keep it running as hiring a competent third-party claims administrator. It's got to be done. A major difference between the SIF and the UEF is the fact the SIF pays indemnity but not medical claims. We pay medical claims. We get cases of injured workers, and they can last for years, for a lifetime. And so we basically take on the role of an insurance company and take care of those workers with their needs for the rest of their lives. And you can't do that on the fly, and you can't do it with amateurs. You've got to have a professional company. They've got to have a national network for pharmacy. They've got to have a national network for doctors. They have a national network for transportation, national network for interpretation. You save, you save, you save, you save. And that's why we do it. It's similar to investing. I invest $3.2 million a year, and it saves me $4 or $5 million. So I make money doing it. And that's why we do it. It's a great deal for the state, and I strongly advise the state to continue it going forward. I'm more than happy to answer questions. As I said, Mr. Stesh is here as our principal counsel, and Mr. Schaefer's here. If you have any technical questions, I'm sure they could answer them much better than I could, and it's really a pleasure to be here.
Well, Mr. Burns, I will say this. I just got to the Senate last year. However, I was on the House side. I was in appropriations, and so I remember when you came in and your team came in. And I remember the challenges that were before us then, and I commend you on working toward ending those challenges. Could you speak to two things for me? One, I would love to take you up on the offer, and I think it's important, I know it's important for us to continue to look at the TPA contract issue and how we make that transition. And two, Mr. Kramer mentioned the vacancies, two of which have been vacant for 2 years. Talk to us about the challenges on getting those positions filled.
Sure.
And keeping people there.
Yeah. And I Senator, I used to be in the House of Delegates, and my attitude is just to tell you all the truth. When I got there, the place was a disaster area, and Mr. Schaefer and Mr. Stesh would tell you what they would tell you, but I think they would concur with that assessment. Nothing, literally nothing worked right. Everything was broken. When it came to staffing, first I had to get financing. I had to get the agency financially solvent. I can't be hiring people then. So the first thing we had to do was that, along with a number of other things. But we'd finally gotten to the point in late 2019 where we could fill all these vacancies. And I was in the process of filling them all. And in fact, we had advertised them and we were ready to interview. And then March the 16th of 2020, the state closed. And it all stopped. I mean, we were literally going, I had all 6 of them in the line, ready to go, and it stopped. 18 months later, we started it up again. I've hired one. We're in the process, and in fact, we're working with DBM to work out the bugs. I know that you all deal with the budget, but hiring can be a very complicated issue in the state of Maryland, and there are all sorts of boxes that have to be checked and things that have to be done and forms that have to be right. And we're at that point with the second position, and that'll take care of the 2 technicians. I have 2 positions I want to hire for claims investigation. I'm ready to go on those. We're working out again, you have to have the right documents before you can advertise it, but we're going to be doing that as well. The other 2 positions I'm envisioning, one is a permanent law clerk, professional to work both with Corvall and our attorney generals. We have a temp that handles that now. So I'm very, very anxious to get somebody in there to do that. And finally, and we did this, again, I was in the process of in fact, we advertised it once and we didn't get what we needed. But we need someone there to do exactly what Mr. Kramer's talking about. A program administrator whose job, amongst other things, is to work on a daily basis with our TPA to resolve issues and to prevent issues, like the audit finding, for example. Hopefully that will never happen again, because this program administrator is going to be working on behalf of the agency with our TPA on a daily basis to save money, to see what's going on, to work out issues. And again, we advertised, and I just didn't get the right kind of people applying. So we were going to redo that, and then March of 2020 happened. So, Mr. Chair, that is the issue of the vacancies, and it talks a little about the TPA. I've done a couple of reports for the governor about this. We have an annual report due. The legislature requested a report in 2020. If you're interested, it talks about this, and in fact, I excerpted it, and my laptop doesn't work, so I'm using my phone to see the testimony, but I excerpted part of that in our testimony. Simply, in 2022, it would be irresponsible, irrational, and counterproductive for a state entity to attempt to do what a company like Corvall does, which is why all the big counties in Maryland, except Baltimore, hire out to a professional national TPA. Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Howard County, Carroll County, all have hired Corvall to do their third-party claims administration. And they do it for the same reason I do it. They do it better, faster, and cheaper than I can do it myself. It's just, that's the truth of it. If you try to, you're not going to hire people. I've got staff people from Corvall who have 30 years' experience in claims. 30 years. You're not going to hire them off the street for $50,000 a position. It's not going to happen. They have a national
Mr. Burns,
net.
look, I understand. I'm from Prince George's County. I certainly understand. I ran an agency in Prince George's County. I definitely understand. But from a reporting standpoint, information that we need to do to be able to consider your budget, you know, again, you concur with, Jason did a terrific job. Any information that you could help us as we're considering your budget will be beneficial for all of us as we move forward. So, and if you could, please keep us informed. We understand everybody, you know, this COVID period has put a kink in everybody's ability to hire and bring folks on. Just please keep us up to date on that. Vacancies, probably now more than any other time, you know, create more challenges than we can actually bear. So thank you very much, Senator Solly.
I have one question about the vacancies. We see a lot of the departments, we see businesses, period, trying to hire. I can't even get an intern, so
Right.
it's been very hard. But if there's areas maybe where we can look into, you know, in different departments, I guess you could say veterans, you know, if there's maybe on-the-job training, maybe open up something like that to give a person that does have a skill, that does have some knowledge in graduating, or even a veteran, as I said, and maybe giving them an opportunity to have this opportunity to hire. I think we need to look in some areas. It's been, like I said, it's been really tough, and I know it's very hard. But I think sometimes we need to look outside the box and try to find ways where we can help them out, but help you out at the same time. So
I couldn't agree with you more, sir.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank
This
you.
will conclude our hearing on the Uninsured Employers Fund. Look forward to staying connected. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Mr. Burns and your team. Next up, we'll have the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, our budget analyst, Jacob Cash. We'll welcome up Mr. Secretary, Robert Green, Mr. Wayne Hill, Ms. Sasha Vasquez, Ms. Ann Harvey, Mr. Stephen Sanders, Ms. Nigel Roberts, and Ms. Rachel Sessa. So, welcome, everyone. And Jacob, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today we'll be going over the Division of Corrections and the Maryland Correctional Enterprises, as well as the Patuxent Institution, making up the corrections function within the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. On the cover page, you can see that there is an immediate change that I can point out in 2022. There's $350 million in federal funds that were replacing general funds. This was a general fund saving measure for the state and allows more flexibility, but it won't have any impact on spending for this function. Moving straight into the population analysis, there is a large decline in 2021. Obviously associated with COVID-19, there was a delay in most processing of judicial cases, and the correctional population was not being replenished like it previously was. So we saw a large decline that continued into 2022. Looking at the monthly changes since COVID started, you can see that large decline that was sustained for over a year. But in the summer of this past year, those cases started to increase again, and the population under custody is no longer at that low point it was. Exhibit 3 shows the population just for the Patuxent Institution. As you can see, COVID also impacted that population, specifically the female offenders in that unit were all vacated from Patuxent Institution, and they did not start being intaked again until November of 2021. That population is about at the same level it was pre-pandemic as the judicial system starts to return normal operations. Exhibit 4 shows the average, or the number of inmates in each age group over the years, and The trend there has been that fewer young people are incarcerated, while the older age groups tend to stay a little bit more stable, since they tend to have longer sentences or are in the department's custody for longer. Exhibit 5 shows those based on the proportion of the inmate population, and so you can see that the young population makes up the smallest share that it has in the entire decade. The average length of stay has also increased, specifically because of COVID-19. There were not that many people being brought in with short sentences, and most of those had timed out of the system due to just their short sentence length. So the average length of stay increased to 5.5 years in 2021. The department is already seeing that start to decline as processing speeds pick back up and more short sentence offenders are added to the population. Exhibit 7 shows that those age groups are substantially fewer for the small short sentenced inmates, and they have much more inmates that have 15 plus years or a life sentence on their record. Moving to the performance evaluation, this Exhibit 8 shows the number of assaults per 100 individuals in custody. There's a goal that they had not reached for offender-on-offender assaults for 5 years, but in 2021, we saw that rate decrease to below the goal, which is what we want to see. Onto the budget. Exhibit 9 breaks down budget spending for this division, and most of it goes towards personnel as well as inmate medical expenses, and these make up the majority of custodial expenses. There are additional equipment expenses and critical maintenance, which are of note, as well as $8.4 million for inmate payroll and inmate welfare funds. The Where It Goes chart shows the budget change of $36.4 million. 94% of that change is in personnel expenses, and the majority of that is in turnover adjustments. This will allow the department to hire more individuals in fiscal 2023. And I'll also point out, as I did in the overview analysis for the entire department, there is a $10 million security equipment addition in 2023, which will help them to modernize and unify the closed circuit television systems within the correctional facilities and allow them to remotely access them. Additionally, I'll point out at the bottom here, there was a reduction in MCE production materials. Maryland Correctional Enterprises is the organization that organizes inmate labor within the facilities and MCE shops. Those materials are decreasing because sales have decreased for MCE. Moving on to personnel changes, there was a decrease of 24 positions in fiscal 2023, and this corresponds to the transfer of correctional officers from the Baltimore pretrial facility in Jessup. To refresh your memory, Baltimore Pretrial Facility Jessup, or BPFJ, was a temporary solution to overcrowding in Baltimore City that resulted from closing the men's detention center. This was not an ideal situation. However, the department needed to do that in order to safely hold these inmates. They're now able to return them to Baltimore City, so this facility or this unit is closed and those positions are transferred back. Moving on to vacancies by classification, you can see that the majority of vacancies are for correctional officers, although they have the lowest rate of vacancies at 7%. Also, if you may remember, many of those positions that were vacant were abolished in recent years based on budget bill language. So that would have been a much higher percentage in years past, but the inmate population has declined and hiring was more difficult, so many of those were abolished. There's also high percentages of vacancies in some other classifications. Of note, I would say that the psychologists, counselors, and social workers, as well as some of the case management staff, is very important to cover those vacancies and make sure that there are support staff for the correctional officers as well as inmates themselves. Exhibit 12 focuses just on correctional officers and the issue with hiring that we've seen in past years. That gray bar, or the gray area in the back, shows the gap between hiring and separations that grew since 2015. The green bars show how many were hired, and the red bar shows how many were separated. And in 2020, that was in the positive for the first year in many years. And in 2021, that continued, although there was less of a difference between hiring and separations. So the number of correctional officers in facilities flattened out that year. Exhibit 13 shows a slightly more up-to-date view on how vacancies have changed month to month for correctional officers. And there was an increase in the, at the start of fiscal 2022 that we have not seen and completely brought back to normal. So we would like to see hiring increase again or catch up with separations that did increase during the fall. Overtime is something that's also impacted by correctional officer vacancies specifically, and since hiring improved in 2019, we saw that overtime costs have decreased for the first time, at least since 2013. The working appropriation and allowance keep the overtime costs at about the same rate, and this would improve if there were, when hiring increases, overtime costs tend to decrease, so bringing this level down would require additional hiring. Exhibit 15 shows, for example, how overtime costs are impacted by sick leave, which is obviously more elevated during high COVID-19 times. Specifically, DLS found that during peak COVID-19 times, there are 16% more overtime hours worked. This brings us to the recommendation for hiring, which is first to release the $200,000 in general funds that were restricted for hiring reports required last year. These were received on January 25th and helped to develop these analyses. So DLS recommends releasing those funds. We also recommend to apply the same language in the allowance year, reducing the amount restricted from $200,000 to $100,000. We're also asking DPSES to comment on the efforts to keep overtime costs low and prevent correctional officer burnout. The next issue I'd like to talk about today are reentry services, and these are obviously some of the most important rehabilitative services that inmates receive while in custody. Reentry starts at intake when the risk and needs assessment is applied to inmates, and any services that they might need to be connected to or receive in the facilities are identified at that time and throughout their stay. Many of those including substance use disorder, treatment services, mental health treatment, as well as educational opportunities and job skills training are available during the entire stay. However, there are reentry services that were available specifically when inmates are nearing their release date. There's a list right here on page 2021 that shows a few of these services that are available. DPSES tries to implement a verified home plan for each individual that's released, and they successfully did that for 96% of releases in 2021, and 94% received reentry services prior to release. Reentry services are available to all inmates who are nearing a release date. Within 120 days of release, they're contacted by the case management and reentry staff, specifically doing those tasks. Pre-release, on the other hand, refers to a security classification, which is the lowest security classification in the department. Previously, there were several pre-release units dedicated to just that classification. However, the department at this point has closed all of those standalone facilities. Pre-release inmates are not the only ones who are available to go on work release or other special leave. There are also opportunities available to minimum security inmates who are within 5 years of release and do not have to register as a sex offender, have not escaped in the last 10 years, and have no open detainers. Minimum security inmates do have to be directly supervised by correctional staff when they're released to the community, while pre-release offenders may be indirectly supervised by the agency utilizing their services. As I mentioned, all of the pre-release facilities that were standalone in the department have been closed at this point, including 2 in the past year. There was also a minimum security facility, Brockbridge Correctional Facility, closed in 2019. Plans to reopen that as a reentry, pre-release, and work development facility were put on hold due to the COVID-19 situation, as well as the next issue that I'll talk about, which is the Gender Responsive Pre-Release Services Act. This was implemented, or this was passed in 2020, and the veto was overridden in 2021, requiring the department to identify a location, plan and build a new facility for women's pre-release services, and put that in the place most are returning to. There's currently 62 pre-release women in that classification, and the site would likely be in Baltimore City. There's $150,000 to plan this project in 2023, which is under collaboration with DPSCS and the Department of General Services. Under the analysis of DLS with how these types of construction projects typically go, they seem to be on track, and still, while it is on track, will probably not meet the requirement in legislation. However, that requirement was largely considered to be too quick, and with the situation that has unfolded with COVID-19, is not necessarily able to be stuck to. There are other current pre-release opportunities available. Like I mentioned, work release is the major program for inmates who are transported daily to earn a regular wage and a regular schedule at a normal job, which eases their transition to the community. There are also outside work details, which are utilized by the State Highway Administration, Department of Veterans Affairs for those cemeteries, and the Department of Natural Resources. You've probably seen some of these work crews out in the community. And as I mentioned, if you're pre-release, they can be indirectly supervised, but minimum security inmates are directly supervised by correctional officers. There is also the option for inmates within 12 months of release to be transferred to a local jurisdiction they're returning to for pre-release services at that facility. Currently, 9 counties have an agreement with DPSCS to transfer those inmates, and there's also a threshold in Baltimore City since DPSCS has control over Baltimore City Jail. Threshold is contractual pre-release services that provide similar situation for males returning in Baltimore City. Prince George's County also operates an in-reach program to provide virtual services while those returning to Prince George's County are still in DOC facilities. Transfers have been put on hold currently to those local facilities due to COVID-19 transmission, but those who would have been transferred are still able to participate in state pre-release programs and apply for those work credits to reduce their sentence. Home detention is also a major program that inmates who are eligible may apply for and participate in. Those must reside in an approved home with an approved sponsor. They're required to wear a GPS monitoring device, and they have to comply with very specific restrictions based on their supervision case. Eligibility was expanded during COVID-19, and the number of cases that were on active home detention doubled in 2020 and 2021. In addition to these services, there are a bunch of services available in limitation based on the area. There are many memorandums of understanding and other agreements with community organizations, companies, rehabilitators, as well as many connections to community service providers in the community based on where the inmate is returning. There's more information that can be found in Exhibit 1, which summarizes the Joint Chairman's reports. These 3 at the bottom show the pre-release and re-entry issues that I just went over. And the final issue talking about today is that MCE sales are low, but they are still higher than expenses. Exhibit 16 shows that the majority of MCE expenses are from supplies and materials, which go towards making their products, and there is about a quarter of funds support regular payroll for their employees. Exhibit 17 compares sales and expenses each year, as well as the inmate employment rate. And in 2020, you can see that inmate employment was required to drop very low because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which not only impacted the ability of them to work in a enclosed environment, but also impacted the demand for their specifically office supply. Demand decreased substantially, and MCE was forced to change operations a number of ways to increase sales and cope with COVID-19. Exhibit 18 shows the average delivery time for MCE orders, and these increased dramatically in 2020 and 2021, not only as they faced the decrease in employment, but also as the supply chain and various delivery times increased across the board. We are asking for this issue for MCE to comment on recent efforts to reduce their delivery times, increase their sales, and increase MA employment. Finally, the one recommended action we have for this, I mentioned earlier, is the quarterly hiring and attrition reports, restricting $100,000 in general funds. With that, I have no more points on my presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. Seeing no questions from the committee, but I just want to acknowledge that the chair slipped in very quickly. Swift there. So we just want to acknowledge that we're joined by Chairman Gazone. And at this time, I'd like to recognize Secretary Green and his staff. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Gray, members of the PST Subcommittee, Chair Gazone, thank you for joining us today. For the record, my name is Robert Green. I'm the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today is Sasha Vasquez, our acting Deputy Secretary of Administration. Also joining us to take questions if necessary, Mr. Wayne Hill, our Deputy Secretary of Operations, Ann Harvey, our Commissioner of Corrections, Stephen Sanders, the CEO of MCE, Ms. Nigel Roberts, our Chief Financial Officer, and also our Chief of Staff, Rachel Sessa. The department appreciates its ongoing collaboration with the Department of Legislative Services, and this was yet another very thoughtful and thorough analysis, and we thank you, Mr. Cash, for this hard work. As I always do, if I may begin recognizing the staff of the Division of Corrections, the individuals who do incredible work every day, but within the last 23 months have just done incredible work within our corrections system. We thank them, and they make our success possible. The analysis contains 2 issues for the department to respond to and 1 recommended action. I will start off by saying, Mr. Chair, we agree with the recommended action. With regards to the issues we were asked to address, you should have before you our written testimony, so I will attempt to be brief. First, DPSCS should comment on their efforts to keep overtime costs low and prevent correctional officer burnout. We need to acknowledge these are extraordinary times. The past 24 months, 23 months have not been normal. Our staff within the DOC have written, executed, and implemented a never-before established pandemic plan and a response to a pandemic in a correctional facility, and again, just done an extraordinary job in doing so. The department takes a very multifaceted approach in its efforts to address how we utilize overtime. It includes closely monitoring our overtime trends, implementing operational modifications, and of course, hiring more correctional officers. In terms of the monitoring trends, we modify the operations. We track the number of staff that are not available for duty on a daily basis, on a shift-by-shift basis, to make sure that we are reviewing and ensuring the facilities are properly staffed, they're safely staffed, while efficiently utilizing all the overtime that is necessary to keep our facilities safe. We seek to gain a better understanding every day as to what those factors are that are driving the overtime so that we can address them where possible. The biggest strain, I think, an acknowledged strain on our staff is mandatory overtime versus voluntary overtime. That is when you are told you're not going home. It is part of the mission of public safety. We are always there, but again, it is tough on the staff that have to do it every day, and to hire more correctional officers to mitigate that is our priority 1. Based on exceptions provided by the Department of Budget and Management, we are allowed to utilize lieutenants. They can volunteer to work some overtime, which broadens the pool of staff that we can call upon in those cases. The department takes its overtime utilization very seriously, and we understand the impact upon the men and women that do the work every day. Next, the department was asked to comment on MCE's current efforts to reduce order delivery times, increase sales, and increase inmate employment. COVID-19 has had a significant
impact on the Maryland Correctional Enterprises operation. On several occasions, MCE was either forced to pause operations completely, reduce program participation in order to maintain our social distancing protocols, or just quite frankly comply with all of the changes and mitigation efforts across 7 surges that we experienced. They've also experienced the same supply chain issues felt across the entire country. Although delivery times increased during the height of COVID-19, MCE is returning, as we are as a system, to a more normal and expeditious delivery time. I do think it's important to note that despite the challenges they faced, over 85% of their deliveries were on time. Even though MCE has experienced a decrease in sales, they continue to exceed its business plan goal of $50 million. I would like to note that MCE adapted their business plan at a very critical need at a very critical point in time when there was simply no PPE or hand sanitizer to be found, to be purchased. 331,000 units of PPE were manufactured by MCE. That's face shields, masks, reusable gowns. Over 4,000 pieces of protective equipment, the barriers that we see, the vinyl barriers, plexiglass barriers in schools and other places, they put into production, not only as a business plan, but to help people stay safe. This is extraordinary. 6,846 cases, or 90,000 bottles of in-house manufactured alcohol-based hand sanitizer, again, when it could not be found. They also manufactured 57,000 plus units of paper goods, posters, printed material that we needed to communicate the safety message, not just in our department, but statewide. And I would note that MC did an incredible job. Participation by the incarcerated population, I would tell you they were excited to provide this assistance, contribute to the help as they were watching the pandemic unfold around them. Even though MCE, as of December 2021, MCE's FY22 sales are $600,000 ahead of FY21 sales. We're recovering. However, there are a number of bills that, if passed, would negatively impact the future sales and revenues, which include Senate Bill 872 and House Bill 1245. With regard to program participation levels, MCE has safely and methodically increased those participation levels while following the COVID-19 protocols. And again, we continue to hopefully move our way out of that. They're safely increased program participation from what was an all-time low to 942 active program participants in December of 2021. So MCE will continue to increase that participation level as we again continue to reopen with various phases of getting back to normal. Finally, I'd like to note that MCE was able to achieve a profit of $78,367, or 0.14%, and $327,463, or 0.65%, in FY20 and 21, respectively. Despite continued obstacles, they continue to persevere, they evolve, they review their business plans, and they provide some very essential workforce development skills to the incarcerated individuals. Again, I thank you for your time, and we are prepared to answer your questions. Thank you. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Green, and your dynamic team for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. One, let me commend you on during this tough period of time of your the challenges you had with overtime, and to even show that there was a decrease in overtime. That's an exceptional job. I know you put together a comprehensive plan for COVID regarding a procedure that was totally brand new, but if you could share with the committee a comprehensive plan going forward, hopefully we're coming out of this, and addressing the overtime matters going forward. We do understand mandatory overtime, but if you could share with us a comprehensive plan regarding that. Your civilian vacancies, quite startling. Those of us who've been in public safety, but also these committees, we look at the COs, the correctional officers' vacancy rates, but it's quite astonishing to see we're talking 20 to 42% vacancy rates within your civilian positions there. So if there's some sort of plan you could share with us, and we would certainly want to help you in regard to that. You know, the system is set up to rehabilitate. So we would certainly like to be a part of that. And any shortcomings on anyone working within the confines of what you do is challenging. We have psychologists and social workers, 42%. 42%, that's huge. Case managers. So we would certainly like to see a plan that you all have going forward, if there's any assistance that we can give you. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, if I might, reentry plans and other pieces of legislation. You mentioned one piece of legislation. I recall, you and I recall being in the same room almost a decade ago when the reentry of members or inmates back to their communities, where the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services was trying to work with the local DOCs to say, hey, look, can we release these individuals back to your local jurisdictions? That was well over a decade ago, and we are still there in some regard. Now, there was some legislation put forth. I know the Western Maryland contingent has been working on some pieces of legislation, and like I think we would like to see what that means, because if an inmate who we hope has served their time and been rehabilitated or prepared to be released can't find he or she's way back to their home, there's, you know, the numbers show that there's a propensity that, or we don't like the odds of them being able to survive in that environment without some support. So, you know, so I'll keep it there. We'll continue to talk because, you know, as I do know, we see you all often. So if you could share that, I'd appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and we'd be happy to share that for you in writing and are prepared today to discuss any of those elements if you would like to do so. So perhaps I'll start with reentry. Respectfully, I think we are better than where we were 10 years ago. We're moving in the direction that you and I would like us to move. Over the last 3 years, we've established this reentry with the home detention is an element of an individual being able to engage the community where they live. Used to be, we had a catchment area for reentry and home detention that included 7 counties. We've opened that up statewide at one point at the height of the pandemic, and not solely because of the pandemic. We had 450 plus people living, thriving, working in the communities that they are returning home to. Mr. Cash's analysis very eloquently points to 94 to 96% having a home plan. That home plan is where they are going to live and thrive. So the pre-release concept, in some areas, you had an individual that was going to a pre-release facility, getting a job in an area upon release from that facility was moving 100 miles away and in essence starting over. So the concept of being able to place people where they live, where their home plan, where their supportive structure is, where their family, we're well into that. COVID. You know, I don't want to sit here and sound like a 23-month broken record, but it impacted the trajectory of those plans. The reentry plans with our local sheriffs and our local law enforcement officials were strong. That focus on how do you return a person through and to the county where the services exist, and we can really smother individuals in those services. I think we are well prepared to be right back on track with that, and we absolutely share in your zeal to get this done. And as you know, when I got here, one of the first things I did was appointed an assistant secretary of reentry, because it's not just 120 days from going home. It starts the moment you come in our door at some point, and how we make that connection. One, I'm very passionate about the evolving COVID plan. We are in lockstep with MDH and the science about how we recover, how we come out, how we evolve out of COVID. We're in those discussions right now. I would tell you last night at 6 p.m. we were on the phone with the epidemiologist from MDH doing those very plans as to how we continue to vaccinate, boost, test, and make sure that we're well aware of how that is moving through our system, and we'd be happy to share those plans with you. Around the overtime plan is, $150 million in overtime, a reduction of $5 million in the middle of the pandemic. We really feel like we did some extraordinary work through the staff through unthinkable circumstances. We're able to reduce that. I would also point to the fact that some of the overtime was not just around responding to COVID as a virus, but responding to mitigation. The ability, if a staff member was exposed or had an exposure, didn't know, really being able to apply leave so they could take care of their families and not bring that into the workplace. That was a significant sum of overtime we utilized around mitigation. At one point, we had 1,000 people out of the system in those types of leave when we were at the height of a surge. So I'm pleased to say I think when we come before you next year, it will be a much different story around overtime, but we need to hire. And around the civilian hiring, if I may, Ms. Vasquez.
Thank you, Secretary Green. Thank you, Senator Jackson. Sorry. Thank you. The plan continues to be the same. We are committed equally to correctional officers and the rest of our administrative and support staff. Circa 2019, we had over 250 acting capacities. We had been able to reduce that to 150, and despite the pandemic, continue that level throughout the last 2 years. In 2020, April 2020, our recruitment efforts suffered a hit, and that was the imposition of the hiring freeze. We know that the budget situation at that time was unclear, and there were measures that had to be taken that impacted negatively our ability to recruit those administrative and support positions, as there was an additional step in the process. We had 283 positions that were impacted at that time. And in a market that was unstable for everyone, it was difficult to re-engage those candidates and restart some of those processes that we had already put in place. But we had continued to recruit. And actively right now, if you look in the DBM website, you will find 24 administrative and support positions being posted right now, and a larger number in some sort of step between interviews, background process, and already hired for this year. So we are deeply committed to those positions. We understand there are some positions that are critical, like the areas that you mentioned, and we work closely with those hiring managers to establish a strategic way of recruiting for those positions to increase our chances of success.
Thank you. And I'll end on this. I appreciate that update. Again, we're resources as well.
Yes.
Our university system, our community college system, as you know, I think COVID brought about some thinking outside of the box for us on not being so rigid in how we do things, but making sure we get quality folks. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Salem.
Well, it kind of hit what my concern is, because I think hiring is a really important part right now, because that's why you're giving out so much overtime, which I know out in the world today, there's people that are just pleading, and everywhere that I've seen hiring everywhere I go. If I go into any type of store, they're hiring, and I know it's important, and I don't know what it's going to take to fill those positions. If there's specific ones that you think that need to be emphasized, maybe, again, thinking out the box, trying to find ways, looking to our veterans that are getting out of service, things like that, I know you can hire them, and I know they'll be very responsible in that sense, and I think they'll be easy to train because how qualified they are. But there is other areas, in some ways we can do that. I think it would be a benefit to you. And also another part, how you were talking for the reentry program, I'm happy to see that there was 96% of release prepared for home plan, and 94% received the reentry of services. And I'm glad. Are there, like, because I saw the list that was there of how you're trying to prepare them, so before they get out, they're well prepared. And I know you use different departments. Are you finding other areas where you could possibly also help that out in the state?
Thank you for that question, Senator. Absolutely. The connectivity to local government, to local jurisdictions, to local resources, nonprofit, we've expanded all of those, but we also know that those were the very services that were greatly impacted during COVID-19. Making sure individuals have their ID, that's a given, birth certificates, social security cards, the things they need to become employed, perhaps a connection absolutely to a job, but all of the other services and the wraparound, they're very unique to where a person's going home to. It's unique to the community, it's unique to the location, and we're working really hard to connect them there. Reentry navigators, social workers, we've increased while we have vacancies there, we've increased our number of social workers. It's pivotal because we're not only preparing a person to go home and reenter society, we're preparing them to reengage their family. And all of those things, and quite frankly, generational realities to help change their lives and change their families. And impacted by COVID, ready to go, and have prospered even to the degree possible through this pandemic. And we'll also share with you, Senator, our hiring plan. We're in veterans, we're veterans organizations, we're out of state. We've created a reciprocal, as law enforcement has, in terms of training to be able to bring people in at a CO2 level, not bring them in at an entry level so they're not starting over. We're in Pennsylvania, I think, next week, so we're looking at jurisdictions where we draw from, and we're taking every good idea and doubling down on it to include how individuals exit our armed forces and are coming back to communities, but we'll take all the help we can get, because it's a tough market right now, and we can't afford to fail, because our population is there, it's necessary, and it's essential.
Secretary, if I may add that we do have, as a result of the report that we provide quarterly, update on our efforts, not only on the correctional officer side, but on the administrative side. So that will have information up to date, and we provide that quarterly at this point.
That's good to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, just a couple questions. One of them is in reference to Horizon, the contractor that provides health care services to those incarcerated. There have been concerns in reference to the price that the project was bid at. It's going to come up for rebid, I guess, in 2023, but I believe that they have some extra appropriations that may be before the Board of Public Works. If you can just comment on that.
There are no additional compensation before the Board of Public Works at this time.
Okay. Will there be in the future extra compensation in reference to the price that it was bid at being more than what it is before the Board of Public Works in the near future?
Thank you for that question, Senator. The two modifications that went before the Board of Public Works went before them. They were approved, and at this point, I can't predict the future of health care.
Okay.
With our population, I can say that there is no matter before the Board of Public Works at this time to increase the compensation of that contract.
No, I appreciate that. The second question is, in one of the pieces of testimony that was submitted, it talked about the raises that are being given out by our respective agency, and it talked about larger raises for new hires versus the folks that are currently working there. If you can comment on that.
We worked very hard with DBM to look at the compensation of entrance level salaries of individuals that are coming into our system. We started that. That was started before I got here in 19. We added some more, so obviously entrance level salaries have increased for our correctional officers. The most recently ratified contracts are going to add across the board additional compensation, which will affect our entrance level salaries. There was also adjustments that were made as part of a change in the CO2 classification to allow for a lateral transfer that changed some compensation factors there as well.
It looked like, yes, please.
If you don't mind, the change that went in effect was July 1st, 2021. That was a result of the start of a new classification, the Correctional Officer 2. Like we discussed, we are trying to open the pool of candidates so that we can have more experienced correctional officers that may not need to go to the academy. With the starting salary for that position that should have been higher, obviously to that of the Correctional Officer 1, there was 3,800 correctional officers that benefited as a result of an equity adjustment, and they were not at the same level. They were given an additional step on top of what a correctional officer 2 was starting at. The correctional officer 1 position also had an increase from a step 3 to a step 5 that made that every correctional officer that was at that level 1 also receive or was moved in the scale up to step 6. So they made out better than the correctional officers that are just starting in the system. And this is without accounting for the new changes that the governor had announced. We're talking about a cost of living adjustment of 1% that just happened for January, a 3% increase in July 2022, a 2% increase set up for July 2023, and then 2 increments for the last fiscal year and the one upcoming, all of which we think are great recruitment and retention tools for those classifications.
Thank you. And I'm going to go very quickly, so if you can give responses quickly, too. There was a concern brought up about case managers being left out of the wage enhancements, and it's about, they stated a percentage vacancy rate in here, but I don't want to assume the vacancy rate. You all know it, so if you can comment on that.
I don't have the vacancy rate for case managers before me.
I
Ms.
do not
Vasquez?
have the specific rate at this point. I can say that they have an open recruitment right now, and there's a number of case managers being brought on board, so that will have an impact on the number that you have in front of you. All classifications, all state employees received the enhancement that I mentioned last, the cost of living adjustments, the increases, increments, and even bonuses on top of that.
And we'll get you the additional information on that, Chairman Correa.
That would be helpful. Second to last question. There was a Sun article, just looked like about a week ago, 9 days ago. Maryland shortchanged Jessup prison officers nearly $500,000. If you can comment on that.
Certainly. So there was an investigation, an inquiry that began in November of 2020. It was found that staff, there was a dated policy being utilized at one of our facilities that resulted in staff not receiving the compensation that they should. We wholeheartedly want our staff to have that compensation. We took corrective action. I believe it's a $468,000 some dollar due to our staff. Actively took steps to make sure that our staff get that. In the last month, we have received a number of additional complaints, and we're actively reviewing them. But my focus is to absolutely make sure every single one of our employees is paid what they are due, and we will do so if we find any more anomalies.
Thank you. Last question. There are a number of pieces of testimony in reference to the Women's Release Center. Could you just let me know what agency's at?
The
status
Women's
with it.
Pre-Release
Yes,
Center,
sir.
thank you for that question, Chairman. We were as soon as that veto override occurred, we made sure that there was monies placed in our budget. I believe it's $150,000. That begins the Part 1 process. We notified DGS of those monies, and GGS is actively involved with us in the development of Part 1 and the normal flow of the construction of a new correctional facility.
Thank you. It looked like Senator Jackson's coming around for a second bite at the apple.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I failed to thank you all for participating in. Senator Rosepep and I have, and others, are very much interested in apprenticeship programs for public safety. So thank you for lending Jennifer Beskett, well now Dr. Jennifer Beskett. Mm-hmm. We go back a little bit to that process. That is, I think it's going to be a huge step for all of public safety, and appreciate you all's participation in that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, ever since you've been here, you know one of the biggest concerns of mine was this overtime issue. It even goes back prior to some of your former secretaries before you, especially with the District 1 and District 2 delegations where we have 5 prisons, some of the largest in the state, the only maximum prison in the state, unless you've changed something since the last time I talked to you about it. To me, it's a big safety issue, not only for the correctional officers, but also the inmates. And you've recognized that, and I'll tell you, you've done a great job. You've actually took some of our comments on how to maybe hire more people and put them into effect, and I think it was helpful. I think COVID had some impact on what's going on at this point. I think, a couple quick questions, Mike, Mr. Chairman. Do we still have this in place where if you live in Allegheny or Garrett and you apply, you have to go to Hagerstown for 2 years before you can transfer back to Cumberland? We did away with that at one time. Where are we with that?
I do not know that to be a formal policy of the department. We try to hire people wherever the vacancies are. Hagerstown vacancies are a bit higher. I have not looked at the region compared to Cumberland. We've increased some staff hiring there, but we're hiring people and placing them wherever we need them and can fill a position, and doing a great deal of regional recruitment.
Well, it used to be that some of them had to go to Hagerstown, work 2 years before they could come back to Cumberland if they were from that neck of the woods.
Well, I do know that some commute both ways, Hagerstown to Cumberland, Cumberland to Hagerstown, but it is not a formal policy of my administration to do that.
Okay, so you got 2 prisons in, we'll say Cumberland, Allegheny County, 3 in Hagerstown, Washington County, all within a stone's throw of each at those sites. Do you or are you allowed to utilize all the staff at those? Say you're short a week at Western Correctional, can you take some at North Branch and move them over there to fill in the hole till you get back up, or are you not allowed to do that?
Thank you
Or
for
do you do that?
Thank you for that question, and that's how we made it through COVID. Staff working together, moving individuals constantly. The deputy secretary being able to have people voluntarily adjust from one facility to another for the greater good. Staff were very helpful in doing that.
So, you know, all young people these days don't want to go to college. Did we, a couple years ago, change the age of hiring certain people or not?
Senator, we did. Thank you. And we have a bill before this body to reduce the age to 19, not as an opportunity to create that very stream from community college, from community to work. 37 states have done so, and we would be happy to share with you all of our testimony around that, the importance of that, the absolute necessity of allowing individuals to start a career at the age of 19 and not lower the bar. It is essential in our regions, Cumberland, Allegheny County, and the Shore. We have different cultures, different work focus in those jurisdictions from one end of the state to the other, but across the state to allow a 19-year-old to come and do what we do and maintain the integrity of the office without lowering the bar is exactly where we need to be.
Just 2 more quick things, Mr. Chairman, if I might. The new training facility at Allegheny College in Maryland, excuse me, is that working out pretty good?
That facility was formally dedicated, as you know. I joined you there last year to do so. It's working out very well. We have now a very professional space associated with a community college for the purposes of training. We've hosted 2, I know of 2, if not 3 recruitment events there. They are very welcoming to us, and we're creating some great relationships. We've also committed to make sure that there is an academy held there as needed, so that all of those counties in the far west do not need to travel to Sykesville or Hagerstown to achieve the mandatory training required of corrections.
Just real quick to wrap this up. You've done a lot more advertising than some in the past, haven't I? Thank you very much for that. You're doing a great job. Keep up the great job. I would suggest to you that maybe you might more often, intervals, use such things as the paper, which you've done in my neck of the woods, but you don't do it overly often. Billboards, which I've seen 1 or 2 in my neck of the woods, which I think are good advertising. Post offices on their billboard, not saying we want you for different reasons, that sometimes they're the post office, but whatever. Colleges. And now, since we're dropping to 19, a lot of students don't want to go to college, maybe putting some flyers in high schools to make young people aware of what you're looking at. So, Mr. Chairman, if I might, they've done a tremendous job. I've written a lot of recommendations for people to go to work there, a resume, send in their resumes and stuff. And, we got the a 20-year and out now, so they're retiring sooner. That's another impact on
Yes, sir.
getting people to work. So again, thanks for all you do, and just keep up the good work. And but I would ask maybe you consider less interviews and putting stuff out to the public on what you have to offer, et cetera. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Edwards. Mr. Chair, just want to make sure there's no questions that you may have.
I don't want to belabor the whole hiring and retention, but are you, particularly the folks that we're losing, do you do exit interviews with everybody? Do you have- What's that?
As an department, yes, Senator.
Yeah, okay, and do you have some overall sense of, I mean, I gotta believe that a big part of this, and as we move on to the future, not just because of the nature of your business, but all across every industry, these issues of quality of life, both within a facility and within a job and outside of the job, are huge. And are you working with your employee organizations to really dig into what are those things that are going to improve those quality of life issues to hopefully keep them in these jobs?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Chair. I personally attend every LMC that is had with the Division of Correction and with our colleagues at AFSCME. I listen to what's happening. We know shift work. Shift work. We are 24/7. We do not have a choice. There are industries that are closing shift work and going to day and second shift, not doing a midnight shift. We don't have the ability to do that. That's a real barrier in today's world, looking at shift work. We have individuals that are leaving because of the consequences of mandatory overtime. I acknowledge that, absolutely, because it just does not fit their life, and we've got to hire people. Really focusing on those two issues, but also we're a victim of our own longevity now. So we've looked at the number of staff that aren't just at retirement age based on the state retirement of 20 years, but as I'm reaching biological retirement and beginning to think about that, we have a large number of people that have stayed a long time, and we've put incentives in place to get them to stay a bit longer. But we have to realize that bill is going to come due, and it is starting to come due, which, again, our focus on 19-year-old Senator, our focus on the ability to create multiple paths for every occupation, whether it be social work, looking at how we can use LCSWCs or bachelors of social work, and everywhere we can establish an apprentice or a pathway to employment. We want to explore all of that.
Senator Salem.
Working shift work for probably over 30 years and working the night shift, I can relate to that. But we've had management working with the union to adjust schedules in ways that was be more accommodating to you, but to the worker. And they found ways where if it was working with the union, which is tough, because I was in the union for 31 years, I can understand having a conversation with them and seeing if there's a way where you can work that out. We had to work doubles at times because we had people not showing up. But we worked in ways where we worked a 12-hour shift, which we accommodated them, and it helped you out, and we worked well. So maybe there's other ways where you can look into to try to make adjustments for yourself and working with them. They're working a 4-day week, 12 hours, and getting 4 days off, and adjusting that to give them more time off, but working more hours. That works hand in hand with you and works with them. So we've done that, working with unions and companies and businesses. And maybe that's something that you can look into just to help out, just to say.
I thank you for that question and observation, Senator. And my number one issue at the last LMC was schedules.
Seeing no further questions, Mr. Secretary, I just want to once again reiterate what we always reiterate. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your team's leadership. And thank you for each and every worker, CO, case manager that's out there on the front lines, making sure that we do what we're supposed to do as a state. So thank you. Colleagues, there are a number of folks that wanted to testify on this respective agency, and I tried to ask some of the questions that I saw in the written testimony. We're going to pull up some of those individuals, and we're going to ask them if they can speak for 2 minutes apiece. The first one that I would like to bring up is Ms. Denise Gilmore from AFSCME Maryland, and Ms. Judy Eklar from AFSCME Local 1678.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Senators of the committee. My name is Denise Gilmore, and I'm a field representative with AFSCME Council 3. We are incredibly proud to represent the women and men who show up to work every day and have been showing up to work every day, certainly these last 2 years during the pandemic in what are very challenging work environments. I think particularly given how difficult the last 2 years have been, and certainly the last several years with the well-reported staffing shortages that we've had in corrections, it is incredibly frustrating that, even more isn't being done in the face of the billions of dollars of surplus that the state is currently running to deal with the staffing shortages that persist, as has been talked about across all classifications showing up to work in our state prisons. The department's solutions thus far, we feel, are inadequate. They have put in some specific targeted wage enhancements, but they only affect certain classifications. Community or case managers, for instance, were left out of the wage enhancements entirely. They didn't have an opportunity for the longevity or retention programs that happened. Our specialized officers, supply officers, maintenance officers, too, did not see the full package of enhancements that we've used for others in the correctional series. And when you pile all of this up on top of the incredibly tough work challenges that you do have a problem with people resigning. And we agree hiring needs to happen. We support efforts to continue working with the department to increase hiring, but you can't make a dent and get more people in a prison to where it's noticeable for the folks that remain there, unless you make an effort to retain your staff too. So in closing, we do have Officer Judith Eklar, who's going to be testifying as well. We simply feel like more can and should be done. We have prepared written testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions on that as well. So thank you.
Ms. Eklar.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judith Eklar. I work with MCIW, and I've been with them for almost 9 years. May make me the 9th year working with MCIW, and I'm here to talk about the how the jail is run and the minimal staffing that we have right now. And very often we mandated to work upon we volunteering. We volunteer and we mandated to work on our off days as well. You get 3 days off and sometimes they take a day from you. You get 4 days off, sometimes they take 2 from you. And sometimes you would have volunteered a day. And that is not something that is really, it takes away from your personal life and your family life as well. And it causes a grief. I'm a single mother who is raising 2 kids, one in a college and one in a final year in high school. I've missed out on his football games. I've missed out on a lot of seminars that he's going on because I'm at work in the evenings, and sometimes I'm drafted. On my days off, I'm mandated to work. This is not good. And the biggest problem we see with the way the department is trying to increase staffing is that they are giving all the targeted raises to the new employees to entice them to the job, but not doing a good job training the experienced officers we have to run the jail. Staff need help of experienced officers to show the new ones how and the ways to run the jail properly. And the budget report confirms that we have what we have felt. Is it okay?
Please finish your comment.
All right. The current budget report confirms what we felt. 41% more officers left DPSCs in 2021 alone, more than 2022, just because the enticement they're giving is geared towards the new officers. We have, up until last year, I did not get a step. And when they gave the new officers coming in as step 6, they gave the old officers 2 steps. We're still nowhere near the new officers. And we have sergeants at step 8 and 9, between 7, 8, and 9, making exactly what the new officers coming in. And they have been in the system for 15, 16, and 17 years. That is not a good sign. And bringing them in at the same rate with those who has been in the system is really difficult. In between the barriers that these young officers is making the same amount of money you're making who has been in the system for years, they don't even let you tell them anything. They tell you up to your face, we make the same money anyway. And that is issue right there.
Ms. Eckler, we'll look into that one and ask the agency for feedback. And I want to say, Ms. Gilmore, we also will look into the case manager. As you I looked through you all's testimony to try to drive down on some of the issues, and we'll make sure that we get a response back from the agency from the vacancy rate and also talking about the enhancements from the salary enhancements. I do have one question for you, Ms. Eckler. In reference to the proposal that's being put forward about lowering the age, you heard the agency, the bill has been before the General Assembly a couple years. If you could just briefly comment as a worker that's in this space, your thoughts on that.
Right. Lowering the age rate, I think, is a bad idea. A 19-year-old. In the world today, to call a teenager an adult, he has to be 18. And to take full responsibility of themselves, they have to be at least 21. That is not a good idea. The inmate population are very, very manipulative and intimidating. A 19-year-old is not going to survive. It's just going to make the situation unsafe for everyone around them. Because one, they're not going to be able to make decisions and stand by their decisions. And the inmate population is known for manipulation, is going to manipulate them to anything. They have been able to manipulate officers who has been there for 20 years already. So imagine what they would do to a 19-year-old. It's not a good idea.
Thank you. Seeing no questions for the witnesses, I'm going to call up the next witnesses. Just want to say once again, thank you for your service each and every day, and thank you for the folks that work around you, their service. Thank you again. At this time, I'm going to call up, it looks like Psalms Rojas. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, from the Marion House.
You did great. That's exactly how it's pronounced.
And how are you doing again today? I just remembered, I remembered you from the visit.
Yeah, I'm doing well. I thought, yep. Well, I'm glad you got to see our place. Excuse me. Good afternoon, Senator McCray and members of the subcommittee. My name is Psalms Rojas, and I have the honor of speaking to you today on behalf of Marion House and the women that we serve. Almost 40 years ago, Marion House was open to support women leaving incarceration, providing them a safe, stable, and sober place to live while they build a solid foundation for their life after release. Today, we continue to serve women in need of housing and support services after serving anywhere from 6 months to 30, 40 years in prison. Over our years of serving this high-need population, we have seen that the comprehensive services addressing employment, education, mental health, and more help prepare previously incarcerated women for successful reintegration. That's why we've been coming here year after year, fighting to pass this bill, and again to override the veto against this bill. We know that incarcerated women deserve equitable services that best serves them, not further punishes them by withholding much-needed services to aid their transition back to the community. We know you know this too. That's why we are coming to you again to ask for your help to ensure that the department is taking the necessary steps to get the center open and running in a timely and efficient manner. The department has stated that they are including $150,000 in the FY23 budget to start the planning and implementation, which is a stark difference from the $1.5 million that was appropriated in FY21 on the bill's passing. While we have questions about the differences in these numbers, that's not our focus today. Today, we're simply asking to see this $150,000 as a line item on a budget so that it is something that can be tracked and accounted for. We're simply asking for accountability and transparency. As advocates and on behalf of directly impacted women, we hold both gratitude for passing of this bill and frustration as we are left in the dark about the progress of the project, only to find out that it's delayed and postponed. Maryland's incarcerated women have been waiting for too long. They deserve equitable services, and they deserve it now. We respectfully request your support in ensuring that this happens by providing a separate, clear budget line item for the $150,000. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Seeing no questions from the committee, I'm going to pull up the next witness, which is Matan Zemer.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Matan Zemer. I'm a community organizer with Jews United for Justice. We represent 6,000 Jewish Marylanders and allies across the state. And we're a member of the Women's Pre-Release Equity Coalition that's been fighting for this legislation and now the implementation for many years now. You'll hear from several other members as well today. While you have my written testimony from our organization, I just want to highlight a couple key factors, especially in response to what we've heard today. Obviously, we're grateful that the General Assembly passed the legislation and then overrode the governor's veto. But since becoming law in February of 2021, we've seen no progress towards establishing a community-based standalone pre-release facility that this law now mandates. And to be clear, we certainly understand that the veto of the legislation by the governor and the subsequent override delayed the timeline that was initially in the legislation. We know that there's accounting for that, but we still have yet to see meaningful progress. This legislative session, as you've heard, the department has stated that they are including $150,000 in their operational budget for the planning phase for FY23. You've also heard from the budget analysis that it's in there as well, but we believe that having the money identified as a line item is an important way to ensure the money is used accordingly, that there's transparency and accountability. I also want to uplift that in the year following the veto override, there was actually $1.5 million originally allocated for the planning phase of this project and the implementation of this new law. But the department did not use those funds, and so they were returned to the general fund. So we would love at some point to know the reasoning behind that, and also why the current request is so much lower than the initial allocation. So at this rate, it'll be years before a pre-release center is built, which will mean women have to go longer without a pre-release center, nearing close to 20 years. In closing, I just want to highlight one of the other missed deadlines that's required by the law is a report to the General Assembly from the department on their progress. There was no report submitted by December 31st as required, and we heard that raised as a concern in the hearing, I believe, 2 weeks ago with Judicial Proceedings Committee. And so the department has said that they're working on it, but we would love to see that report come to fruition and see what's in there. So finally, there are many, you'll hear from 4 members of the coalition today, but I just want to highlight that there are a number of organizations across the state that have been working tirelessly on this. I know you've heard from several of us. We appreciate your work, and we'll continue to advocate to make sure that this becomes a reality for incarcerated women in Maryland.
Thank you. This
Thank
is
you.
the first time hearing about the report, so we're going to take note just to see whether the department
It's on the final stages of approval now.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, and I have a copy of the legislation. If that would be helpful, I'm happy to point that out as well.
Yeah. Seeing no questions, we'll call up the next person, Monica Cooper.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name's Monica Cooper. I am the Executive Director of the Maryland Justice Project. And I wanted to first thank everyone for their leadership on Senate Bill 684, because if it wasn't for your votes, we wouldn't be here. The other thing I wanted to just echo what my colleagues had mentioned, to please ensure that this is a line item, one that we can identify, we can track, because what I can tell you, and I got to be transparent, it has never been the intention of the Department of Corrections to build this facility or allocate funds for it. We have had to fight them tooth and nail, meeting upon meeting. We have been coming back and forth to Annapolis to get this done. And finally, we got the law passed. And I'm just being honest. And what the current administration did was they vetoed this effort economically. Economically, they vetoed it by constantly avoiding putting money in it and speaking in front of you guys about how perfect the system is. I almost felt like the department was relitigating something that had already been put into law. And I will tell you, as somebody that gets phone calls from people inside the system, it is absolutely nothing like those slides were painted to be. I'm just glad that as a formerly incarcerated person and as a woman who actually went through the pre-release system when it was available, that I know how that system works. And there were many Pinocchios that were said to you here, and I'm just glad that as somebody who actually experienced it, you can ask me questions, and I could be more forthright. I am the person who actually was affected by it. I am the person who talked to these women every day. When they say that they transport people to work, they are taking people to work in a Department of Corrections van. They are charging women $500 to $600 a month to stay inside the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women, and they're calling it a pre-release program. It's not right. The drug addiction that's going on behind that wall is not right. They just had a bus, and they put it in the Baltimore Sun. There were correctional officers involved. There were volunteers involved. They were taking drugs in there. You know what they're doing right now? Rather than have a pre-release center where these women can have intensive drug treatment, where these women can actually be prepared, it's step down. It's gradual. And we're not talking about home detention. Home detention has nothing to do with the services that will make sure that when a woman go home, she don't OD within a week. She OD within a week because she was using drugs the whole time inside the penal system. And they sit here and paint this rosy picture. I would love to be able to provide you via email some actual facts of what's really going on and why we need this pre-release center built today, not yesterday, and not allow this process to be economically stymied. And thank you for letting me go over my time. Appreciate you. I really do. I appreciate all you guys do. And I love the fact that I can actually share that with you so you can see the other side. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, I'm gonna call up our last witness for this hearing, Nicole Mundell.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Hansen Mundell. I am the Executive Director of Out for Justice, a nonprofit advocacy org that advocates for individuals who are behind those walls and individuals who come out to pursue a successful reentry. I echo all the concerns of Monica. We are not here to debate right now about what what the department put in front of you versus what is actually happening. We're here to talk about the money. The money, the $1.5 million that was allocated for this project was let to go back into the general fund. Do I feel like we should be advocating for more money right now? Yes. But because we are here at $150,000, we almost begging y'all for pennies to start a project. That's what we're doing here. And so for the sake of women behind those walls that need this navigation, I am okay with begging you all for pennies to start the project. We need you to name this in the budget as a necessary line item so that we can begin to really hold the Department of Corrections accountable for this process. That's where I'll stop, because I'll get too emotional about how far we've come. I'll get too emotional about all of you all's impact and helping this bill. I wish the chair was here, because he was very phenomenal, an instrumental role in making sure that that veto was overridden. Whether he wanted to be a part of it or not, he did it. And so I appreciate you all. Let's make sure we put the money where the law says it should go. Let's make sure we do the right thing. And if I can just add one statement, I know it's difficult because this whole committee is full of men. There's no women here. And so women are at a disadvantage in this committee. And so I ask of you, when you are thinking about this issue, be guided by women who have lived the experience, by people like myself. Whether you like me or not, I have the information. We have the same goal, to make sure that the law is implemented appropriately. That is our goal. And so please hear from women, because you all don't have a woman's perspective here. And that's where I'll leave it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for coming up and giving us that side of what goes on. Look, use the tools that are before you. The previous speaker spoke of emailing all of us information. Please do. If we don't know, we don't know. Yeah. All right? And this is, so help us to help us.
Yes,
how about that?
We will. Thank you.
All right? Thank you all.
Thank you. And I got up so quick, I was nervous. I didn't know if
You're
I had
fine.
questions or not.
You all did terrific, if I might say so.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you all. And before we end this hearing, I just want to acknowledge Jacob Cash. Just wanted to say thank you for your detailed and thorough analysis of the Department of Public Safety's correction piece of it. At this time, I'm going to bring up, it looks like next is Department of Environment. And we'll bring up the analyst, Andrew Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's the Maryland Department of the Environment, MDE's operating budget summaries reflected there on your screen. The MDE's budget increases $39 million, around 22.2% to $214.7 million in fiscal '23. In terms of the Managing for Results exhibits, Exhibit 1 reflects the Maryland air pollutant trends relative to the air quality standards, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. What you're seeing here is that all the lines are going below 0%. That means that they're going they're actually meeting the standards, except for ozone 8-hour standard, and it's just above the line. So we're almost there for air quality in terms of at least meeting the basic standards. In terms of Exhibit 2 reflects child blood lead status information, and what you're seeing here is a decrease in terms of the number of children 0 to 72 months tested for elevated blood level in 2020, and that's primarily most likely a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and people not seeking medical care during that time period. But you are still seeing a decrease in the elevated blood lead levels for children, so that's a good sign. In terms of the third exhibit here, you see an increase in the Public Information Act responses issued within 30 days. It's excellent. This has become a focus of the administration, or the Maryland Department of the Environment's leadership. It's an excellent sign. You do see a decrease between 2020 and 2021 in terms of the permits processed within applicable standard time. My understanding is that they're looking into that, trying to understand more about why that occurred. Fiscal '22, there's a proposed deficiency of around $1.5 million in general funds for the Water and Science Administration and the Air and Radiation Administrations to counter declining special fund revenue. And there's another smaller general fund appropriation as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about the declining revenues in a second. In terms of Exhibit 4, shows the overview of agency spending. The almost half of the agency spending is reflected in the coordinating offices. This reflects the $33 million for the revenue bond debt service, the $20 million for the Clean Water Commerce Act of 2021, the $15 million for the Tree Solutions Now Act of 2021, and then $11 million for operating and maintenance grants for wastewater treatment plants have been upgraded to enhance nutrient removal technology. Exhibit 5 reflects the change in the budget. So once again, it's around $39 million increase. This reflects a couple of changes, substantial changes. First of all, in terms of personnel expenses, You're seeing deficiencies in fiscal '22, and you're also seeing deficiencies in fiscal '23 for programs that did not have sufficient special funds in order to be able to operate the program. That's a $3.5 million net increase there. And then also you're seeing the increases for the Clean Water Commerce Act funding and for the Tree Solutions Now Act funding. And at the very bottom of this page, you see $602,000 increase for contractual FTEs in the water supply program. That's around 10 FTEs to address some concerns that came about as a workload analysis that was contracted for by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. In terms of the personnel, once again, just the increases, general fund increases due to the revenue shortfalls reflected in this section, and then the Clean Water Commerce Act increase of $20 million. That's funding is coming from the Bay Restoration Fund. That's then used for the purpose of purchasing cost-effective nutrient and sediment reductions. And now actually it's an extension of an existing program and allows for also agricultural best management practices to be included as well. Then the Tree Solutions Now Act reflects a $15 million increase in special funds from the Bay Restoration Fund, and that's a one-time only Bay Restoration Fund transfer. And that funding will go to the Chesapeake Bay Trust, $10 million for the new Urban Trees program. There's $2.5 million for the Department of Natural Resources, and an additional $2.5 million for the Maryland Department of Agriculture. And this is all under the rubric of the Tree Solutions Now Act of 2021. In terms of the personnel data, there's no change in positions. MDE has reduced the number of long-term vacancies. However, they still have a relatively high number as shown in the personnel data here. In terms of first issue, DLS had recommended to the General Assembly and to the Budget Committee's narrative last year, and you guys had adopted narrative on personnel expenditures budgeting. The concern here is that when Maryland Department of the Environment submits its data, its actual data, it reflects a certain amount of the funding in a particular sub-object that should be distributed out, and therefore it doesn't allow for good comparisons between the years. The Department of Legislative Services noted that the information didn't come in this year with the information allocated properly, so recommending budget bill language be added to restrict funding until the proper budgeting of those sub-objects. The special fund shortfalls are the second issue. We've already talked about the fiscal '22 deficiency and the fiscal '23 funding coming in for now 3 administrations that need special funds, or general funds, excuse me, because of shortfalls. Exhibit 6 here reflects the major funds supporting each of these 3 administrations: water and science, land and materials, and air and radiation. And what you're seeing here is that with the exception of the Maryland Clean Water Fund, they're running low balances. They're not bringing in the revenue sufficient to be able to cover their operations. General funds are needed. This, however, appears to be an equity issue. I mean, in terms of the polluter pays principle, there should be funding that should be brought in through fees. There should be funding that should be, the entities that are regulated should be helping to pay for this and not the general funds of the state. And this is kind of the way that the system is set up. DLS recommends that MD comment on why in fiscal '22 and '23 is using general fund revenues to support the 3 administrations: water and science, land and materials, and air and radiation, instead of revising the outdated fee structures that were also noted last year for the air and radiation administration, where there were also additional general funds brought in because of Title V permit revenues not coming in the way they were hoping. And moving now to the third issue, this is the drinking water program understaffing. So on December 1st, the Attorney General issued a press release noting there was understaffing MDE's water supply program. Concern here is that MDE's delegated authority for primary enforcement of the water supply program, the Safe Drinking Water, Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, and consultants' report that was contracted for by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency indicated that while robust work was done in the past, MDE appears to be now just kind of meeting minimum requirements and was therefore potentially in danger at some point of losing primacy or the delegated authority for the Safe Drinking Water Act enforcement in Maryland. And this is a concern. This is obviously not a situation we want to be in. There are a couple of reasons why this is going on. There's increased workload over time in terms of additional lead testing in schools. This is a regulation that's expanded the amount of work that has to be done by the water supply program beyond the kind of original purview of the Safe Drinking Water Act. There are also approximately 350 hospitals and healthcare centers that will be coming in online in terms of an agency will then be responsible for looking for them as well because the required Legionella treatment is being installed. There are regular position and contractual FTE decreases that have occurred over time. There's a report from the consultant indicated there is a gap of approximately 55 regular positions and contractual FTEs in 2021, which increases to 75 in 2029. There's general program underfunding in general, too, in terms of a gap around $7.6 million estimated in fiscal '21, increasing to $10.2 million in fiscal 2029. So there are 10 contractual FTEs in the administration's budget, but that's contractual. Those are short-term, in theory, short-term positions. They're not supposed to be doing ongoing work, which would appear to be necessary based on this workload analysis. In terms of the consultant's work, Cadmus's work recommended a couple things. You can fill the existing vacancies, because it's not just adding new positions, it's also filling the existing positions that are vacant. Develop a resource investment plan with the EPA Region 3, so that was another consideration. This will actually be part of the recommendation because the resource investment plan has not been made public yet. Utilizing the 4% Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. Set aside funding. There are opportunities to use some of the federal money for supporting the operating program, but MDS really seems to be focused on using that money for the capital side instead, which is laudable, but then obviously perhaps shortchanges the operating side of the program. Increasing the state investment in the water supply program via the general funds. There's also the opportunity potentially to do that as well. And finally, the opportunity to bring additional revenue through creating a fee system similar to either Pennsylvania or Virginia as well. In terms of recommendation here, DLS recommends that MDE provide the budget committees the resource investment plan that was required to be submitted to EPA with MDE's fiscal 23 written testimony. That was required to be submitted by my understanding by October 21, and describe how the fiscal 23 budget addresses the resource investment plan and general water supply program shortcomings in addition to the 10 contractual full-time equivalents that are budgeted in fiscal 23. Moving now to the fourth issue, this is the groundwater protection program update report. There's some science here. I'm not going to go into it. The basic idea is that we need to do a lot more work in terms of looking at our groundwater. There's some large reports that have been done in the past. The Woolman Commission, I was even here back then, did a tremendous amount of work in terms of looking at what was needed, but has not been followed up on. The problem is that we haven't seen the funding necessary to do a lot of the studies, particularly on the Eastern Shore, to look at the aquifers there to see if they're sustainable in terms of being able to supply for all the needs of Marylanders in the light of climate change and saltwater intrusion and all the other concerns out there. 7 recommendations in the report. DLS recommends the General Assembly consider the creation of a sustainable funding source for looking at and managing groundwater, because if we don't have water to drink, it's a problem. And the requirement of an updated groundwater report every 3 years. Actually, it was recommended by MDE's report. In addition, DLS recommends that MDE comment on the extent to which groundwater protection program recommendations can be implemented administratively within existing resources in order to kind of get this going, important work going. The 5th issue here concerns the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding. We have not seen the funding yet. My understanding is a lot of guidance is coming out in February and perhaps March as well. We'll understand a bit more at that point. Exhibit 7 reflects the big picture, at least for a lot of Maryland Department of Environment's PAYGO program, and we'll be talking more about that in the capital analysis. You see here that a total of $880 million can be potential between federal fiscal 22 and federal 2026. DLS recommends that Maryland Department of the Environment comment on the sources of the funding that it anticipates receiving, the time of the receipt of the funding, whether the funding will be budgeted as operating or PAYGO capital funding, whether it's sufficient information in particular, and I think this might be interesting for you guys, the lead service line replacement funding, the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund. So that's something that really is a concern in terms of trying to make sure that we really eradicate the lead problem in drinking water service lines in Maryland. The question is, does the agency have the information necessary to be able to do that at this point? Then the recommended action here is that budget bill language restricting $100,000 until the sub-objects in Object 1 personnel expenses are reflected correctly. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. Seeing no questions, we're going to ask for Secretary Grumbles. And Secretary Grumbles, Horatio Tablata, Deputy Secretary, isn't on my list, but I do know him very well because he's my problem solver.
That's right.
With MDE. So
That's how I was going to introduce him,
It's
Mr.
problem
Chairman.
solving.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Andrew, for your analysis. Thanks to all the members of the committee for saving the best agency for last. And let the record reflect that I'm smiling behind this mask when I say that. We come to you with an outstanding operating budget. Our department has over 950 public servants who are committed to protecting the air, water, and land, and increasing customer service. And this budget is robust. It's an increase, and it focuses on priority areas. And I appreciate the governor's support for the environmental department and also for the environmental mission throughout the whole region and for the state of Maryland. I also just wanted to say to you that as you were discussing with Secretary Green, prior witness, I even tried out in the hall, I keep trying to convince him to exchange last names because I really like his last name and he just won't do it. But we have no gripes about this budget. It's an excellent budget, and I appreciate your endurance and sitting through some very important testimonies. I want to get right to the questions and the analysis. And as you know, I'm joined not only by the problem solver, Deputy Secretary Horacio Tablada, but by the head of our budget and programs, Terry Wilson. And we've provided written testimony in response to the analysis, and I hope members and their staff get a chance to read through it. On page 18, we're asked to comment on the aggregated fringe benefit accounting data in the budget file. We agreed to work towards this possible change in the 23 budget. We spent a lot of time trying to work through the complexities of that, and we were not able to meet the request. I'll address that as a recommendation. We will respectfully disagree from making that very specific change in methodologies. But I also want to comment on the, as requested, on the increased general funds being provided in the Water and Science Administration and the Land and Materials and the Air and Radiation. Let me say this. We have the people and the resources to continue to deliver clean and healthy air, water, and land for all Marylanders. We do have, like many other states I work with and their environment secretaries, during COVID and also prior to COVID, there are good news stories of reductions in emissions, which can reduce the revenues in terms of permit fees. But we also have had a number of reductions, particularly recently in the number of facilities due to plant closures or changes in the number of rental properties or reduced tire sales. The decision that was made was that given the availability of some general funds, it was decided to increase general funding in the short term to cover some of these needs and provide fiscal stability for the programs. I understand the balance that is required when someone is suggesting or proposing new fees or increased fees when it comes to air, water, land, materials, and waste permits. It requires thoughtful consideration of many factors, stakeholder input, legislative approval. That would not have been implemented in time to meet the funding requirements of this budget cycle. So I'm very appreciative of and supportive of continuing to cover our costs and meet the priority needs without trying to hoist some new fee program or a fee adjustment onto the regulated community without proper engagement. Now, I was also asked to comment on a topic that's been getting a lot of attention and has been a priority for us over the last year, and that is staffing in the drinking water program. We are working closely with the EPA. We worked closely with the outside consultant, Cadmus, on a growing sense of that we had a number of vacancies in our drinking water program, and we have been very busy on that front to fill vacancies. Andrew Gray mentioned that the budget before you, the governor included 10 new general fund contractual positions to address the needs. We assigned a senior agency official to routinely review potential vacancies that come up in the program and to work to fill those vacancies. We've had great support from the Department of Budget and Management and the governor's office. We've gone from having 66 FTEs for the program to 78. and we're fully committed to providing for 102. And we believe, in our professional judgment, that that's the right number that will ensure we not only meet basic needs for delegation under the federal programs, but also that we continue to protect our precious water supplies. I would encourage each of you to read the letter I sent to the Attorney General on December 9, correcting some misstatements and also pushing back on mischaracterizations that tried to suggest that we were putting people at risk. That report that was done, and it was a national report also with some focus on Maryland, which we agreed we need to fill some vacancies, but that report had nothing to do with the safety or quality of the drinking water. It's a management tool, and we appreciate your support and the urgency of filling vacancies, as we always strive to do, to make sure that we continue to be a leader in the environment, and in this case, the drinking water programs. I also wanted to address a question that Andrew brought up, the groundwater protection study and the Woolman report. And I appreciate the history on that and the importance of it. And you will never hear from any one of us at MDE lacking the value and the importance of our groundwater supplies. It is our hidden, unseen natural resource that's a very important one. And so we take recommendations and the putting together the groundwater protection study very seriously. There were 2 recommendations in the study that we submitted to the legislature last year. Two of the recommendations that have the potential to be implemented administratively without legislative action. One, which we're very much working on with MDOT, is training road salt applicators on best management practices to prevent further chloride contamination near wells. It's a very important issue, as we know extreme weather can lead to more applications of materials, so we're focused with MDOT on brine and in other practices to make sure that public safety is never compromised, that we prevent impacts to streams and wells. The second recommendation that we can implement administratively is to require periodic updates of municipal source water protection plans. I would note that while a lot of people want to focus on understaffing or the potential drinking water program, our state continues in working very closely with EPA to have very high compliance rates. 99% of the facilities, the community water systems, are meeting all the federal standards. That's not to say standards aren't going to get tougher. That's one of the reasons why we put so much effort proactively into the PFAS situation, the forever chemicals that every state in the nation is testing more on, and that the federal government is going to be strengthening the science on, and that's going to translate to more challenges for compliance and more a need for greater resources, not just for staffing, but for communities to invest in the source water protection and manage these chemicals that are persistent and can be costly to clean up if they threaten fish or water supplies. We were asked to comment on a very related topic, and it's one that I am extremely positive and optimistic about, and that is the bipartisan infrastructure law. Governor Hogan pushed really hard for this national federal legislation because it's all about clean transportation and reducing the risks that come with crumbling infrastructure around the country. And Maryland, because of that legislation, is absolutely poised to benefit from it. We have $144 million additional funding that will be coming to the state this year for our drinking water and wastewater programs. $52 million specifically for the very important necessity of getting lead out of water, the lead in drinking water challenge. That Our goal in working closely with the federal government, particularly EPA, is to maximize the flexibility so that states like ours can use that funding, not just for doing a more robust statewide assessment of the lead service lines and where they are throughout the state, but using that funding for not just lead service lines, but for pipes and fixtures in schools and other public buildings. It's very important. It is absolutely an environmental justice issue, and it's one that we're enthused about. And having public engagement and getting advice on how best to use that funding and work with other departments like housing and community development. I was also asked to comment specifically on the recommendations to withhold $100,000 of general fund appropriation unless we reconfigure our accounting methodology for the department, and we would respectfully disagree with that recommendation. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my statement. I'm happy, along with my problem solver here, to answer questions or to receive any advice you have.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your comments. A couple of questions. There are at least a couple of us that are on this panel who live in mountain or rural tier areas, and well and septic is well on our mind. So I live in southern Prince George's County. I represent Calvert, 3/4 of Calvert County. I think maybe in a previous hearing or something, I may have mentioned the dredging component, where you're talking North Beach, Chesapeake Beach. There's a dredging issue there. I know the Army Corps of Engineers and Navy and others are involved in those programs. And I think when we talk about whether it's lead service lines or the seepage into the wells, or as local governments are either building up resort areas or beginning to build in areas that had been restricted for decades because of the well and septic component. Talk about your relationship with the local governments. And last year, this General Assembly passed House Bill 980 in Prince George's County. Portion of Prince George's County east of 301, near the Charles County line, is primarily well and septic on the side where I live. Although there have been, we believe that passage of that legislation, there's some future planning for development. And there are some environmental justice organizations there. One of the maybe recent river keepers, Mr. Tupman, or in those organizations, Gavaka, BTB, those organizations have some concerns because of those areas have in the past been used for rubble fields, mining, gravel pits, power plants, and so could you briefly, and you feel free, we can talk offline definitely, but could you briefly talk about that as we're looking to ensure that we are taking care of our land, air, and sea?
Right. Thank you so much. The Maryland Department of the Environment is not the local planning agency. We don't do zoning. We don't do the local planning, but we absolutely have, whether it's a proposed rubble landfill or landfill expansion or new siting of a facility, or potential for risks to wells or failing septic systems. We have quite a few people in the department, and in fact we have it within the Office of the Secretary, the former liaison for MACO, Les Knapp, who's focused on the local liaison work on well and septic and on these very intensely local impact subjects. We also have, I designated an official as our environmental justice official who, very senior policy official who helps interact with our permitting programs on these localized impacts in areas of concern. one of the reasons we're putting a tremendous amount of emphasis on climate change, which didn't get a lot of attention in the analysis, but it's been a major component of our efforts over the last several years, particularly on localized impacts of flooding. We know that in Prince George's County in particular, we know that there are areas where more resources are needed to help reduce flooding. And it's not sea level rise necessarily, it's extreme weather and poor drainage.
Yes.
So we know we have an important mission to support local government and citizens on permitting decisions. We also know that from time to time we get sued, sometimes by the regulated entity that wants to locate a rubble landfill or facility, and sometimes by an advocacy group that feels we're not putting enough emphasis on a particular need they have in their community. That's one where we try to, as best we can, follow the law and the science, increase transparency, and advance environmental equity.
And I appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, so I would love to speak to Les Knapp and others, but in addition to that, I failed to mention, I mentioned the Chesapeake Beach area, which is the Calvert side of my district.
The dredging you mentioned too.
The dredging piece, but there's also the issue with the, down in Eagle Harbor. That is an ongoing challenge, and they've had a change in, their mayor's seat, and so there's some changing in their administration or their town leadership down there. But there are some issues there with Chalk Point and the Pepco facility, and I believe that your department has been involved in the conversations there, so.
And I've been involved in conversations with Fred Tutman about SEPs, Supplemental Environmental Projects. We have as a policy within our department that when there is an enforcement action against a polluter who is paying penalties, that there can be an opportunity to, rather than put all that into the penalty, have additional project that can be locally a supplemental environmental project. We have a policy of emphasizing disadvantaged areas, environmental justice, and also tree planting and other green infrastructure components.
But I appreciate, and Mr. Chairman, I will follow up offline with the Secretary in his office, not to take up much more time here, but I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Look forward to it.
Thank you. Yes, it's highly advised.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Just one quick question, and if you could just briefly give a statement. There was, I guess, some contention in EHE on the briefing that you gave in reference to, I guess, inspectors or things of that nature. If you could just speak to that so we know what your position is and what the department is doing, that would be helpful.
Sure. One of the key components to environmental progress is enforcement, and one of the key components to enforcement is inspections. We are using technology to increase the number of inspections, off-site video-enhanced inspections, not in lieu of on-site inspections, but to supplement that, to make sure that progress is being made or compliance is being followed. And I'm excited about that. We're not the only state. There are at least a couple dozen states that are looking at using video enhanced. This is one of the things that was reinforced by COVID when inspectors were not traveling to sites. Is there a way to use video enhanced inspection? That's one item. The other one is that we, I think what came up in the hearing was with respect to poultry houses, and we are moving to have an increased number of inspectors on site. But we have to be very careful about that because of the sensitivities to avian flu and the potential spread of viruses. That's always been a challenge for there are real constraints on how many inspectors can go to more than one facility in a day because of the the potential spread of spreading of flu, or the virus, the avian flu. So we do have additional resources and staffing on inspections, and we're going to be using this technology to help increase the use of inspections, even if they're not physical on-site, but are used through a remote video camera, working with the facility operator.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions. Oh, Senator Edwards.
Let me get a higher thing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thanks for the job you're doing. I'm looking at the scrap tire issue here.
Okay.
You know, this has been in effect for quite some time. Are we actually making any progress? I know the scrap tires, they're the ones also that when you go get your tires changed at a tire shop, and you give them $2 or $4 a tire, some they get rid of them. I assume they take them to a legal disposable place. So is that number in this number, or is this the number you're finding out in the middle of nowhere where people just throw them?
There's a historical, Senator Edwards, there are historical sites that we're still cleaning up. The component of scrap tires is three ways. One is ensure that the facilities that collect scrap tires, they stay in compliance. So we inspect and permit facilities that legitimately are storing scrap tires. We also, ensuring that the existing historical landfills or dumps where scrap tires were placed are being addressed. First, we address it by the owner of the site. They have to pay for it. And then with the occasionally you find orphan sites that the state has to pay for the cleanup. More recently, we've also been investing in agricultural tires collections and regular citizen drop-off. And that's important because agricultural tires are not the common passenger tires. They just takes a little more time because more investment because they're larger and they're just more rubber and different makeup. So with all that, the agency is still working actively, but we don't see it like we used to see back in the 90s, tremendous amount of tire dumps. You see occasionally tire dump, a little one on the side of the road, and we give money to the counties that kind of go pick it up. And we try to collect that way. And so
I'm looking here, it talks about Howard County Snap Holdings LLC, formerly Tyler Towing in Clarksville, 61,376 initial scrap tires, is expected to be completed by the responsible party. I don't know who that is. Evidently, it's Snap Holdings. The cleanup preparation began using the fund before the property was sold. So they sold the property, and thus the project is no longer eligible to receive state funding.
Yeah,
Why is that? Why wouldn't it continue to be eligible for state funding so you can clean it up?
The new owner of the property knew the tires were there, and he still bought the property because the value of the property in Howard County, this is near Clarksville, which is a very up area in Howard County. Then he was worth the investment of paying for the tire removals and owning the property. So he knew that. That's why the eligibility for the fund was not there anymore.
So do we as a state try to find companies that utilize scrap tires for whatever playground use, or they mix a lot of this in with new turfs on fields and stuff? Do we try to find companies that will buy these tires or take these tires to help get rid of them? Or if you can't find out, what do? Take them to the cement plants and burn them?
Not necessarily. Some of them go there, but most of them, there's a large company, Emmanuel, that is a big investor in recycling, making products out of the tires. And some of them end up going out of state. Some of them, a small number gets burned, but there are more controls now, so they don't burn them as much. And the majority just keep making to a new product. So MES helped us in years past to create a market, like a handbook of where can you use scrap tires once they're clean and processed for scrap, playgrounds and things like that, so.
This is a,
I saw you smile there real quick when I said about burning them, but some of the.
How could you tell?
Because I saw it, but some of the
We don't
cement
encourage
companies,
that.
some of the cement companies actually did burn them.
Yeah.
They did.
At one time.
yeah.
I
Well,
didn't
we're.
mean to interrupt you, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the legislature took action last session and has facilitated the creation of a recycling markets office within our Land and Materials Administration. And for me, this is a great example of creating a market for clean and not toxic reuse of these tires. I mean, I hope someday we'll have a similar type of initiative on batteries from electric vehicles. How are we going to manage that potential Achilles heel? But your point is a good one on how do we manage the tires and how do we find a better place for them. That's one reason why the governor's subcabinet on commerce has a sustainable materials management initiative to look at dredge material, food waste, other types of materials that could be repurposed to go from waste to wealth, or, you know, if it's safe for building materials or playground equipment or turf, if it's safe. But thank you for.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because the more places we can find to redo tires for something else and/or batteries, you're right, it's gonna be a huge issue before too long. And other than using them for something else, they are a big mosquito catching place, breeding place, I'm sorry. So you must try to take care of that too. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and seeing no further questions from the committee, I just want to say thank you for your leadership, what you do for our environmental community and our space as a whole, state of Maryland. I'd also like to thank the problem solver. So every time my calls get there, I know they get delivered. And also just wanted to lift up Mr. Gray in reference to the detailed and thorough report. Colleagues, seeing that this is the last of the 4 hearings that we heard today, this ends the briefings and hearings for public safety, transportation, and environment. Senator Saley.
Could I just, I have a visitor I would like to introduce. She wanted to
Please.
come up here and see us in action. Lynn, she's come from Harford County, but she came down and worked for me for a little bit on my office for a bit. So I just want to introduce her. She come just to see public safety, transportation, environment, and us in action, so.
Thank you, and I hope we gave you a warm welcome. You all have a blessed evening. Thank you again.